war continues with Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Today, we're going to discuss a few highlights of the war. First, why Putin has repeatedly asserted that Ukraine isn't a country. Second, why the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, is going against the odds to support Putin. And third, what benefits they can get. Let's start with the latest and third round of negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. At the third round of negotiations, Putin made 5 demands. The third round of negotiations was held at 9 a.m. on March 7th. On March 5th, the Russian foreign minister said that the Ukrainian president's attempts to get direct assistance from NATO wouldn't help the negotiations. Neither the US nor NATO supported the Ukrainian president's request for a no-fly zone, as it could lead to a direct conflict between NATO and Russia. It risks escalating the war to a worldwide scale, like a Third World War. And earlier, on March 7th, a Kremlin spokesman said it was ready to stop its special military operation immediately if Kyiv met 4 major demands.
And the objectives are very simple, and they were actually explained by our President Putin. We want to see a demilitarized Ukraine. We want to see Ukraine free from Nazi ideology and Nazi elements. Also, we want to have guarantees that the neutral status of Ukraine is fixed in the constitution, and also we want to have guarantees that weapons being able to change the security balance in Europe cannot be deployed on the territory of this country.
The 4 major demands are that Ukraine stop its military operations, revise its constitution to become neutral, recognize Crimea as a Russian territory, and recognize the separatist regions of Donetsk and Luhansk as independent states. Before the negotiations, a reliable source from the media revealed that in addition to the 4 demands mentioned above, the Russians have proposed to recognize Zelensky as president, but only if the Russians appoint a pro-Russian as the prime minister with real power. But this news wasn't covered by the mainstream media. It was no surprise that Zelensky rejected this. Without significant military progress, it's difficult for both parties to arrive at effective outcomes during the negotiation. When the talks break down, the 2 sides are bound to experience an even more intense battle over control of Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine. Does NATO continue to expand east to provoke Putin? There has been a popular view that NATO's continuous eastward expansion has provoked Putin to invade Ukraine. But we see that Putin's actions towards Ukraine have gone beyond teaching it a lesson. His goal is more likely to control or even take over the entire Ukraine. To explain this, we have to start with a symbol. Since the invasion began, locals and observers have noticed several types of white symbols used by the Russians. Z is common in the southern and eastern fronts, while V is seen in the northern front. Some vehicles are painted with a white O shape, and others have the Z enclosed with a rectangle or triangle. The choice of V or Z is also made intriguing by the fact that they don't exist in the Cyrillic alphabet, used to write the Russian and Ukrainian languages. On March 2nd, the Russian Ministry of Defense revealed a more straightforward answer, at least for Z and V, as reported by a pro-Ukraine site. According to the Defense Ministry, Z stands for the Russian phrase, "for victory." V represents the phrases that mean, "in truth lies power," and "the mission will be completed." It appears there is still no official explanation for the meaning of O. The symbol not only appears on military vehicles, but the Russian army also uses the badges of killed Ukrainian soldiers to make a Z shape to show off their victory. Pro-Russia and pro-Putin civilians have also used the Z as a symbol. A Russian gymnast recently put the symbol on his chest at the World Cup award ceremony, and even terminally ill children in hospice centers have posed in the snow in the shape of the letter. Whatever the meaning, the letter has now become a symbol of Russia's new ideology and national identity, as well as a symbol of Russian support for Putin's invasion. This is one side of the story that suggests that Russia's invasion of Ukraine is more than a result of the expansion of NATO to the east. According to an independent poll conducted by the European Parliament news agency and Russian opposition political activists, as of February 26 to 28th, nearly 60% of Russians supported Russia's war against Ukraine, while only 34% opposed it. After the war started, nearly 50% of Russians have a better opinion of Putin, while only 23% have a worse attitude toward him. Despite the fact that anti-war protests continue to break out in dozens of Russian cities and that at least 4,000 people have been arrested, there is a reality in Russia that the majority of Russians support Putin. Why is it this way? There is certainly an element of controlled media brainwashing. For instance, a woman living in Kyiv told her parents in Russia that civilians were being bombed and killed, but her parents refused to believe it, saying that the military operations wouldn't harm civilians.
And but she didn't believe me in her war, so I stopped talking. She lives in Russia, like 1 hour from my city. And when it started the war, I called her and I said, like, Mom, Russia attacked like Ukraine, and she's like, no, it's not true. She's like sending me, like, look, this is your army making war, not our. I'm saying, Mom, they are bombing. I'm her daughter. I'm saying, like, it's crazy. We cannot live here. What is happening? It's like huge. It's war, and she's like, until today, she don't believe me. Like, she is my mother. I'm telling her what is happening. Like that we are going to shelters, we hear bombs, there is like attacks, and she said she's not believing me. So I stopped talking to her because like I can't, if she don't believe her own daughter. She's all like totally brainwashed from TV, because their TV is like all about this propaganda.
Putin repeatedly claims that Ukraine isn't a country. Back in 2008, Putin told then-President Bush, "You have to understand, George, that Ukraine isn't even a country." Why did he say that? It's because in the minds of many Russians, the concept of Russian people is made up of Greater Russia, Belarus, and Little Russia or Ukraine, all of which are derived from the historical Kyiv-centered ancient Russia. In modern times, however, the nationalist movement for Ukrainian independence was born in the 19th century and has never gone away. Especially after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the integration of Ukraine into the rich and free Europe by joining the European Union has become the mainstream opinion among Ukrainians. However, this growing distance from the Russian model of political, economic, and social development is considered a betrayal by those who have an obsession with the Russian Empire, as represented by Putin. It can be said that Ukraine's national independence and Putin's Russian Empire complex are the fundamental ideological roots of the Russo-Ukrainian conflict. Ukraine became an independent country after the collapse of the Soviet Union in December 1991. In 1991, Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine agreed to establish the Commonwealth of Independent States. In 1994, Ukraine signed an agreement that led to the renunciation of nuclear weapons and security assurances from the US. In 2010, Russia and Ukraine signed another agreement which resolved the historical issues between the two countries regarding the Soviet Union's Black Sea fleets and military bases. These three documents are the key legal basis for Ukraine to gain independent sovereignty and resolve the Russo-Ukrainian conflict. No matter how deep the historical ties between Russia and Ukraine are, there is a well-developed system of international law that recognizes the sovereign status of a state in the international community. It's a rule that is universally recognized and followed by almost all countries, including Russia itself. In other words, Ukraine's legal status as a fully independent sovereign state is recognized by the world, including the UN and Russia. However, the Great Russian Empire complex of Putin remains representative in Russia. Putin is anti-communist but admires great power chauvinism. Putin is ideologically aware of the evils of communism, but it doesn't mean that he rejects the chauvinism of the Soviet era. In 2005, Putin said that the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical disaster of the 20th century. On March 2, 2018, when Putin was asked in a meeting, if you could go back in time, which event in Russian history would you like to change? He replied, I would like to prevent the collapse of the Soviet Union. This is a clear indication of Putin's empire complex. It can also be observed from Putin's outrageous demands in this negotiation, especially when Russia demanded to appoint a pro-Russian prime minister with real power. It shows that Putin's ultimate goal for Ukraine is not only to punish Ukraine for being disobedient by launching a military strike and warning NATO, but also to colonize Ukraine in actuality. In this sense, Putin's invasion of Ukraine can be said to be a great gamble. It's Russia's version of the so-called Great National Renaissance. It's probably the biggest reason why Putin and Xi Jinping have been able to reach a mutual understanding, and why the CCP's propaganda immediately projected today's Ukraine onto tomorrow's Taiwan, with the assumption that if the CCP supports Putin's invasion today, Putin will have to support the CCP's invasion tomorrow. In the end, both sides could subvert the international order in Europe and the Indo-Pacific region respectively and rebuild a new world order that they desire. This is the most important reason for Putin's aggressive war against Ukraine. Why did Xi Jinping change his attitude on the Ukraine crisis after his meeting with Putin at the Winter Olympics from his previous neutral stance towards Russia? Why has the CCP refused to openly condemn Putin's actions as a blatant invasion, but has instead supported Putin economically and diplomatically, including by shaping public opinion inside China? Here is the fundamental reason. In other words, two critical factors have facilitated the invasion of Ukraine. One is Putin's gambling mentality, willing to take the risk to restore the glory of the great Russian Empire and national renaissance. The other is the CCP's incitement, collusion, and the promise of financial support. Why did the CCP encourage Putin to go to war? Why did the CCP encourage Putin to go to war? Before the war, the CCP believed that there were at least 4 major benefits to be gained from it. 1. The war will lead to a reorganization of the European landscape, which will inevitably divert the focus of the US and significantly reduce the mounting pressure on the CCP. 2. The CCP gave up its neutrality to support Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and Russia would give up its neutrality to support the CCP's invasion of Taiwan in the future, so both sides can help each other when sanctions happen. 3. Russia's economic dependence on the CCP will increase after the sanctions, hence making it more vulnerable in Sino-Russian relations. 4. The international community will be asking the CCP to mediate and facilitate a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, which renders the CCP more power. So far in the war, we can see that the two things that the CCP has really achieved are the third and fourth items. Both the US and Europe have to engage with the CCP, hoping that it can play the role of a mediator. The CCP has gained very little in terms of the first two items, and the outcomes can even be described as counterproductive. That is, the reorganization of the European landscape has intensified the pressure on Russia, without much effort on the part of the US. Instead, it's the CCP who is forced to respond to the pressure mounting in Europe for its support of Russia. The situation in the Taiwan Strait is getting worse. Japan and Australia have begun to strengthen their military commitment, and Taiwan is likely to receive more explicit support from the US. The heavyweights from both parties in the US have raced to visit Taiwan. Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has even publicly called for recognition of Taiwan as an independent state, which the CCP doesn't like at all. The cost of war has only dramatically increased should the CCP decide to invade Taiwan in the future. The CCP's hype about Ukraine today and Taiwan tomorrow has turned out to be an act of shooting itself in the foot. Let us not forget that the so-called state counselor of the CCP, Jin Tsai-rong, who once proposed a plan to weaken the US by ensuring at least 4 enemies were created for the US. The first enemy on the list is Russia. It serves as a distraction for the US and weakens Russia at the same time, reducing its threat to China. That is why we argue that the role played by the CCP to facilitate and trick Putin to invade is the second critical element. No matter how many reasons there are, war on Ukraine can't be justified. After all, if a country is to pursue a national renaissance, it should be rooted firmly inside one's own country. The only way to truly restore the glory of a great nation is to be industrious and improve people's quality of life. If a country keeps on expanding and bullying its weak neighbors, one will only end up facing alienation and isolation globally. Not only will it not achieve the glory it desires, but it will only be shamed by the people worldwide. We have observed that Ukraine used to be very pro-CCP. It sent a lot of military technology to China which helped the rise of the CCP. but rather quickly it was betrayed by it with a stab in the back. This is how painful it is. Putin's experience is no different, although he has his own mistakes to blame. By associating with the CCP, who is a terrible friend, Putin has been used as a gunman by it.